highly successful for you. So after you start off with the move pawn e4, most of your opponents reply as pawn e5. Now, there was a fairly dangerous opening back in the day called the Danish Gambit, where you give up a couple pawns for the sake of quick development, and after you develop your bishops that way, that gives you lots of attacking potential because you occupy a lot of open lines and diagonals and you are ready for some quick attack. And it used to be successful years ago, but then it turned out that black can get away with 1 or 2 extra pawns relatively easily in a number of different ways. One of them is to gambit one of the pawns back immediately, just to free up, black's development after that, and black gives up one of the pawns but then finishes development, ends up with an extra pawn. Or the other way is also, even if your opponent is not an opening wizard, he can just play the most natural moves, bishop b4, developing the bishop with a tempo, because that checks your king. After that, black goes knight f6 and castles quickly and puts their king to safety, and again, you can't really develop a quick attack, just black is just way too fast in the way they hide their king. But I found a way to make use of the same ideas, but without letting your opponent to escape that easily. There is a little trick here that makes a big difference. Before you go into this gambit idea, we first play knight f3, pretending like you're just playing classical chess. You're attacking the pawn, your opponent goes knight c6 to defend the pawn, and now you shift back into something similar to the Danish Gambit. You start playing pawn d4, black captures it, expecting you to recapture, but you don't. You play pawn to c3, pawn takes, and bishop to c4. Your idea is still the same. You want to finish your development as quick as possible, and after that, rush into the attack against an opponent's undeveloped army and centralized king. In this position, most of your opponents will capture on b2. Later I'll show you what to do if they don't, but most of them will. Now bishop takes b2, and now the situation is trickier for black, because playing pawn d5 is not so appealing anymore. After pawn d5, you can always capture with a pawn and attack this knight, so black probably wants to do that. Let's take it back. The other defensive option, which is something that pretty much all of your opponents will do, is to play bishop b4. Check to your king, you play knight to c3. Now black goes knight f6, similarly hoping to castle, and you do let them to execute this idea. So you castle, black castles as well, and black hopes that their life is good. They're gonna play, d6, develop a bishop, and just win a game with the 2 extra pawns. But here comes knight to d5, and it turns out that black's life is not that easy. This move knight d5 actually puts a lot of pressure on black. Look at this, it attacks this knight. Together with our dark square bishop from b2, we're threatening to capture there, to disrupt the king's pawn shield, and to attack later. Also from here, it puts pressure onto this bishop on b4. And therefore, black is already facing some uncomfortable attack from you. Now, what are they going to do? Well, this knight is annoying, but if they take it, again, you recapture with a pawn, getting some extra tempo and kicking this knight back, so that also doesn't seem that great for black. We're going to take a look at this in a moment, but another option of black to somehow deal with this pressure onto this knight is simply to take this pawn on e4, and if they do, that's the moment of triumph for you. You're going to play bishop d3, relocating your bishop to a more active diagonal, where it attacks the knight and potentially looks in the direction of your opponent's king, and you're actually winning the game. Can you believe it or not? Black just played all the natural moves, and now they're completely lost. Now, this knight is attacked, and actually, whatever they do, they're going to suffer badly. It can't really go back to f6 because, again, we're simply going to exchange it, and black will have to recapture with a pawn, and that'll be completely devastating for their king. They may try knight g5, because this knight is defended with a queen, and so black may think that that's just going to be an exchange of knights. But if they do, that's going to be another spectacular moment. Here you have an absolutely brilliant combo, which is extremely difficult for your opponents to notice unless he's a Magnus Carlsen. That's knight to f6 check, check to the king. We're also attacking this knight, so black has to take. Now knight takes g5. That also puts the pressure over here, so they're going to take it. And now you keep sacrificing everything you got. Bishop takes f7, winning the game in the style of Mikhail Tal or the style of old masters. That's really something that I hope you will execute against a couple of your old chess buddies who used to beat you, but now you have a dangerous weapon to take a sweet revenge. Going back to the critical position of this opening variation, after you just moved your knight to d5, putting pressure on black, we already know that knight takes e4 is a bad option for black. After bishop d3, you just have way too much pressure against black's king. So that's not an option. Now let's analyze the second possible alternative for black, which is knight takes d5. Then you recapture with a pawn, and that's how we take advantage of this knight on c6. Now it has to go back. Notice that we do control all the forward squares like this, so the knight has to go back. They usually move it to e7, and then after queen to d4, you create this very simple checkmating threat. Queen takes g7 with the support of your bishop, and strangely enough, black can defend. One attempt to defend pawn to f6 fails to a little tactics, pawn to d6. Discover, check to the king, and we're hitting the knight. So we're going to grab the knight happily on the next move and continue our attack. That is clearly winning for you. Now let's take it back. Another move for black is knight to f5, but then you play queen g4, and you maintain your attack. So you do attack this knight on f5, and it can't go back because then we still capture this pawn on g7. Our queen and bishop are attacking this square together. What is black going to do? Well, probably something like pawn to d6, trying to open up their bishop and to defend the knight. And if so, you just play bishop to d3, and you actually somehow create a double attack. But again, it's really hard to foresee all these variations for black unless they're familiar with this opening, which is certainly not the case. So bishop d3 attacks this knight, but also you open up this attack against the bishop. And black is completely defenseless now. There are just way too many weaknesses that they have to cover at the same time, and they can't. So they have to somehow secure their king at least, but then you just win the bishop for free. And on top of that, this long diagonal is extremely weak for black, so not only you're having an extra piece, but in all of the following variations, you're gonna threaten something like queen to c3, and then jump somewhere there to h8, and black is completely lost. There is also one more thing that you gotta be aware of. What if you offer this gambit at this point, pawn to d4, pawn to c3, black usually captures, here you play bishop to c4, but at this point, some of your opponents will consider, being greedy, being also too risky, because indeed, pawn takes b2, bishop takes b2, puts you way ahead in development, and some of your opponent will play something like pawn d6. In that case, that actually transitions into another opening, the Igor Gambit, and I have another video which I'll link up there. You can check it out so that you're familiar with this opening variation. This also gives you a lot of attacking opportunities here. But just a quick tip that I can give you, the move queen to b3 is actually extremely effective at this point, because you're hitting this pawn, and in most cases your opponents will play the move queen e7, because what else? And if after queen e7, strangely enough, black is almost losing the game right away. You just take your knight to c3, and the black's problem is that they somehow can never finish their development normally. Let's say they do play knight f6, now you castle simply, and they can't develop this bishop out. You have a lot of threats, in some variations your knight is going to come there, your bishop is going to come there, and, put a pin. Black's king is stuck. They can't develop this bishop because it has to guard the pawn on b7. You see, they almost can't move. That's the black's problem. And if they try knight a5, lots of them will, because it feels like it's a double attack, but in reality it doesn't, because after queen a4, you say, hey, no, it's a double attack, but it's a double attack for me, because now queen a4 hits the knight and the king, forcing black's knight to move back. And after that, you have a lot of winning options, actually. One of them is knight to d5, attacking the queen. And after knight takes, pawn takes, now you're winning this knight. It can't run away because of this pin. You can also play rook e1 on the next move and win a queen using the other pin, so you can win whatever you want and win the game.